eternal sunshine of the spotless mind. At the beginning of the movie, we are introduced to our protagonist Joel, who wakes up alone and confused on Valentine's Day. He waits patiently on the platform, dressed for work. Suddenly, something comes over him and he runs across to the opposite platform, boarding a different train that is destined for Montauk. His inner monologue informs the audience that he is not usually impulsive and that it is completely out of character for him. He sits on the cold, snowy beach in Montauk and pulls out his journal, which has a number of pages ripped out, and he proceeds to write his first entry in it after 2 years. Walking along the beach, Joel notices a woman with blue hair in a bright orange sweatshirt and shies away from her, refusing to even make eye contact. The same woman happens to be on the same train as Joel and, after throwing long and awkward glances, finally says hello. They have a conversation and she mentions that her name is Clementine. It becomes very clear that Clementine is very erratic and inconsiderate as she encroaches on Joel's personal space, making him uncomfortable. There is something radiantly appealing he likes about her, and when she invites him up to her apartment, he obliges. The next day, he accompanies her on a nighttime trip to walk on the frozen Charles River. And for the first time, we are made to feel that there is something brewing between them. We then cut to Joel in his car, bawling and crying profusely. It is unclear when or how this happened. Joel, clearly distraught, drives through the rainy streets and goes back to his apartment, while a white van follows him. After Joel is asleep, 2 men unload the white van and bring a collection of strange equipment into Joel's apartment. In Joel's memory, he remembers telling his friends about his attempt to make up with Clementine. And to follow up on the decision, he went to see Clementine. He describes buying her a necklace and going to see her, and the film illustrates his memories as he speaks. Joel, holding his gift, walks up to Clementine at the customer service desk at Barnes & Noble, where she was working. His face falls as he sees her with a young guy, whose face remains hidden during the scene. She calls him Patrick and pretends to have no idea who Joel is. As Joel storms out of the bookstore, the thought of any future with her shatters behind him. Joel is left to ponder if Clementine is acting as if he's a stranger to punish him. Finally, his neighbor pulls a card out of a drawer and, despite protests, gives it to Joel. The card reads, "Clementine has had Joel erased from her memory. Please never mention their relationship to her again." Joel's 2 friends reluctantly show him a card they received in the mail from Lacuna Incorporated, telling them that Clementine has had Joel erased from her memory, including everything she associated with him. Joel is heartbroken and upset, and decides to go to Dr. Mierzwiak's office at Lacuna to have the procedure done on him. Dr. Mierzwiak commands Joel to go home and collect everything he owns that has some association with Clementine. These items will help the Lacuna technicians create a map of his brain, which they will subsequently use to erase the presence of Clementine in his mind later that night while he sleeps. Joel throws all the suspected items into a plastic trash bag. The next day, Joel returns to the Lacuna office. One by one, Stan places Joel's objects in front of him and monitors his mental reaction to each item to determine how much emotion he associates with them. As we jump back to the present, we now understand that the 2 men are in Joel's apartment to erase Clementine from his memory, and they begin by deleting the most recent memories that reveal the bitterness of their breakup. Meanwhile, though he is asleep, Joel is lucid enough to hear Patrick, a worker for Lacuna, tell Stan that he has been using Joel's things to court Clementine. Almost in a trance, Joel is taken back to his memory. Clementine and Joel are at an outdoor flea market, and she tells him she wants to have a baby. Joel, however, doesn't think they are ready and they fight. Clementine yells at him and proclaims that she would be a good mother, blaming Joel for not being able to commit. Her shouting fades as he walks away, and the memory is gone. While the memory erasure is going on, Mary Svevo, who is Dr. Mierzwiak's receptionist, comes over to hang out with Stan while he is working. Despite the fragile nature of his work, Stan gets drunk and high with Mary while Patrick decides to go see Clementine. Patrick finds Clementine upset and evidently disturbed. She insists that they both go to the Charles River immediately. Back at Clementine's apartment, Patrick pulls a sheet of paper out of his backpack. It's a love letter that Clementine wrote to Joel with an illustration of 2 potato dolls lying on the Charles River. He hides the letter before Clementine can see it, and pulls a gift out of his backpack. It's the red wrapped box that Joel had bought for Clementine before he knew she had erased him. Meanwhile, in Joel's mind, most of the more recent bad memories he had with her during their separation are gone, and he's now watching the happy and tender moments with Clementine fade away into oblivion. We cut to Clementine and Joel snuggled under a blanket in her room. She asks him if she is ugly and tells him a story from her childhood. Joel tells her she's pretty and kisses her. Suddenly, blackness closes in on the frame, and in his mind, Joel begs Dr. Mierzwiak to let him keep this memory, but it disappears along with the others. We cut to another memory of the couple on the Charles River. Clementine and Joel hold hands. He tells her he has never felt this happy before. Suddenly, the memory is gone and they are lying on the concrete while commuters stream by them. Clementine disappears, and Joel is all alone. He looks up at the sky and begs to call it off. He realizes that he no longer wants to lose his memories and begs Mierzwiak to let him keep them, but Stan and Mary cannot hear him. Joel grabs Clementine's hand and they try to outrun the procedure. In a desperate attempt to conceal herself, Clementine suggests that he hide her in memories where she didn't previously exist, so Joel takes her into his childhood memories. He leads her deeper and deeper into his consciousness, trying to duck underneath his most humiliating moments, but it doesn't work. Clementine tells him to come see her in the morning and tell her about their relationship. Joel tells Clementine that Patrick is copying him, but since this version of Clementine is only in his memory, she has no idea what he's talking about. The real Clementine and Patrick are driving back from the Charles River, and Clementine appears to be completely manic. Meanwhile, Mary and Stan have made love and are dancing around Joel's apartment when Stan notices that the machines have stopped erasing Joel's memory. He panics and calls Dr. Mierzwiak. Mary falls for Dr. Mierzwiak when he arrives, but he gets straight to work, chasing down Joel to the depths of his mind and eradicating the memories he is trying to hide within. Mary gets some scotch and the 3 Lacuna employees raise a toast, and Mary, in an attempt to impress Dr. Mierzwiak, quotes Nietzsche. Stan goes for a walk, and while he is gone, Mary kisses Dr. Mierzwiak. Stan was outside and caught sight of the heartbreaking scene and brings it to the attention of Mr. Mierzwiak's wife. Mrs. Mierzwiak drives up at that moment and catches both of them in the act. Dr. Mierzwiak tries to explain the situation to his exasperated wife, and Mary insists that she was the instigator who prompted the deed. Mary corroborates his story, begging Mrs. Mierzwiak to forgive her husband, calling herself a stupid girl with a stupid crush who forced herself on him. Mrs. Mierzwiak stops her car and tells Mary that she can have him. In fact, she has already been with Howard. Then, Mrs. Mierzwiak drives away, leaving Howard to explain to Mary that they did, in fact, have an affair, but then Mary asked for the procedure to erase him from her memory. Broken, Dr. Mierzwiak walks inside to finish the task at hand. Stan watches the scene unfold and offers the stunned Mary a lift. Joel, still unconscious, is now experiencing the memories of his first meetings with Clementine, the initial stages that sparked their love. They met during a beach party in Montauk, and Clementine wanted him to break into a house with her. Gleefully, Clementine finds the liquor cabinet and tells him to choose a wine. Then, the house, all the memories of that night, starts to collapse. Joel tells Clementine that he has to go and catch his ride. She says, "So go." Looking back, Joel reflects that he left that day because he thought Clementine was a nut, but admits that he found her exciting. He wishes he had stayed, especially now. The water laps and trickles slowly over his feet and the frame gets darker. Joel tells Clementine that he left that night because he was scared, and that he could feel the disdain in her voice when she said, "So go." As he runs away, like he actually did, Clementine pokes her head back out and asks him to stay this time, to say goodbye, so they can pretend they had actual closure. He tells her, "I love you," and she whispers, "Meet me in Montauk." The frame becomes blurry, and Joel's final lingering memories of Clementine swiftly disappear forever, every thought of her deleted from the recesses of his mind. Meanwhile, Mary breaks into the Lacuna offices and rummages through the files, until she stumbles upon her own. She listens to her own tape, and hears her own heartbroken voice confessing her feelings for Dr. Mierzwiak, and how she wanted to marry him and have his children. She breaks down, but his soothing voice tells her this is for the best. Back in Joel's apartment, Dr. Mierzwiak finishes the procedure, and he and Stan finally leave. We now cut back to the opening scene, where Joel wakes up. Now, the audience knows that Joel and Clementine have already gone through a devastating breakup and are meeting in Montauk for the second time without knowing it. In the meantime, Mary quits her job, and steals all of the files and tapes from the Lacuna office that contain classified information. When Joel and Clementine return from the Charles River for the second time, after meeting on the train, Joel stops at her house so she can pick up her toothbrush. She also grabs her mail, and finds the tape and file. Clementine opens the package on her lap, which contains a letter from Mary Svevo, telling Clementine that she has had a section of her memory erased. She puts the tape in the tape player in Joel's car, and they both hear Clementine's voice insulting Joel hysterically and explaining why she wants to break up with him. Joel thinks it's a sick joke and kicks her out of his car. Later, however, Clementine comes to Joel's apartment, only to find him listening to his own tape. He shows her a drawing of her that he forgot to get rid of. They listen to the tape together, and on the recording, Joel says that Clementine's shifting hair color is bullshit. It's awkward between them, and Clementine finally leaves. This time, though, Joel chases her and asks her to stay. They ponder what to do. They develop a strong liking for each other now, but they know how their love story ends. He asks her to wait, and they look at each other for a lingering moment. He can't see anything he doesn't like about her, and she tells him that they are predestined to stop being interested in each other, because that is the way each of them is. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind finishes with this open-ended moment, followed by a surreal-looking scene where Joel and Clementine frolic on a snowy beach in Montauk. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind demonstrates the rift between immediate attraction and a successful relationship. Without the memories of each other, the two main couples, Mary and Howard, and Joel and Clementine, still feel the initial lightning bolt of attraction they felt when they first met. In this way, the procedure takes the characters backwards in their emotional growth, instead of the intended result of helping them move on. Mary, unaware that Dr. Mierzwiak has already broken her heart, reads quotes in an attempt to impress him. Joel is taken by Clementine's spontaneity when he is feeling listless and lonely on the train.